Tonight, weathering the extremes, the record-shattering blast of winter gripping the country. The bone-chilling deep freeze in the west.
I want to move away. No, it's really cold.
As the east grapples with snowstorms. Fears of a widening war, the U.S. and U.K. strike Houthi targets in Yemen. Also, a salute to Canada's top soldier as he announces plans to retire. Plus, one family's urgent message about the flu season.
At any point in the moment, I could have lost my baby.
And ticking forward after decades at a standstill.
Actually see it working. It was absolutely wonderful.
The Ukrainian watchmaker who fled war and brought the gift of time.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. There is no let-up tonight in the severe winter weather rippling across the country. Weather alerts in every province and territory in Canada heading into the weekend. Environment Canada issuing extreme cold warnings in the west, winter storm and wind warnings in the east. CTV's Alison Bamford on the dangerous conditions.
A fresh blanket of snow forced many in Regina out of the house today, whether they liked it or not.
I want to move away. No, it's really cold.
I'm not enjoying it.
This bitter cold spell across Western Canada will likely persist through the weekend, with wind chill values expected to reach -55 in some areas. The extreme cold forced an Edmonton hospital to set up temporary heaters in its ER department, and ice froze over this Calgary apartment's fresh air intake, sending 4 people to hospital with carbon monoxide poisoning.
Just a good reminder for everybody, when it is this cold, make sure you're checking your intakes and your exhausts for your furnaces and that kind of stuff.
The Arctic air mass also causing problems for those looking to enjoy the outdoors. In Whistler, 2 skiers are recovering from hypothermia after getting lost last night in the frigid temperatures, and several ski hills have closed their lifts.
No one really wants to go out when it's this cold anyway, so most people, when we announce that we're going to close for a few days when the high is -30, they're pretty okay with that.
The recent snow dump brought chaos to Metro Vancouver roads, resulting in a 25-car pileup during last night's rush hour traffic. Now the snow is heading east. Parts of southern Ontario and Quebec are bracing for up to 30 centimeters over the next 24 hours. For some areas, this will be the 3rd winter storm in a week.
Different from this storm than the last is the fact that we will receive a lot less rain, and the period of temperatures above freezing is a lot shorter this time.
In Montreal, crews are still clearing roads from the last storm. Now they're preparing for what officials call a cocktail of snow, rain, and freezing rain. And Environment Canada recommends drivers avoid any non-essential travel during the storm. Heather?
Alison Bamford in a very cold Regina. Thank you. Let's bring in CTV Atlantic's chief meteorologist, Kaylin Mitchell. How will this all play out, Kaylin?
Thank you, Heather. Well, there are tie-ins between where that colder air is located and some of the paths that we're seeing our storms move along. Let's begin with the position of that colder air. Right now, kind of broke down out of the Arctic, contained within this dip or trough in the jet stream. This overall weather pattern is going to be seeing some changes as we move into and through next week. Some of that colder air shifting a little bit further towards the east, towards areas of Ontario and Quebec. And by the time we get into next weekend, a complete flip in the pattern of the jet stream. Now we have that trough and some of the colder air with it located out towards the east. Some of the coldest air around areas of Quebec and Labrador, and a ridge of much milder temperatures expected off towards the west. As for the storm track, well, that usually sets up where some of that colder air is meeting some of the warmer air around the continent, air around the Gulf of Mexico or around the eastern seaboard of the United States. This past week, that's been set up from the southern U.S. up towards Ontario and Quebec. As we move through next week, we're going to see that storm track pushed further towards the east, towards and off the eastern seaboard of the United States. Heather.
Kaylin, thank you. That blast of Arctic air is already packing a punch in the U.S. Authorities are calling it potentially life-threatening. Vicious winds, whiteout conditions, and dangerously low temperatures are sweeping that country. In Iowa, wind chills could go below minus 40 degrees. Drivers are being told to stay off the roads.
I have never seen anything like this before.
More than 2,000 flights were canceled nationwide. In Arizona, U.S. Weather Service staff threw boiling water into the air to show just how frigid the conditions are. Canada's top soldier is stepping down. Chief of the Defence Staff Wayne Eyre will retire this summer. Once tasked with changing the culture of the armed forces after it was found to be toxic and rife with sexual misconduct. The Prime Minister announced the changing of the Guard this afternoon. CTV's Jeremy Charron joins us now from Ottawa with more. Jeremy?
Heather, he only served a short stint in this top job, but everything here points to a pretty straightforward retirement for General Wayne Eyre, who has served a lengthy career in the Canadian Armed Forces. The announcement of his retirement came via a statement on social media by the Prime Minister, who gave ample notice for this retirement, which will officially take effect in the summer, adding in that statement that his contributions and his leadership in this role and throughout his military career have been invaluable. Now, he first took over in this role as the Chief of the Defence Staff in an acting basis in 2021, before later that year taking on the role officially. But he did so during a tumultuous time in the Canadian Armed Forces. Several top brass members were facing sexual misconduct scandals, and he was tasked with fixing what was called a toxic culture within the Canadian Armed Forces. And most recently, he has been advocating for the challenges that the armed forces are facing now with budget cuts and challenges with recruiting and staffing shortages. So certainly he leaves behind a legacy of someone who took over at a difficult time, did what he had to do, and has now decided that his time has come to call it a career. Heather.
All right, Jeremy, thank you. Members of Canada's military provided planning support for a U.S.-led attack on Houthi positions across Yemen. The early morning airstrike hit dozens of targets, and late tonight, the Americans have launched a second series of attacks. Now, the Houthis are vowing revenge. CTV's Adrian Gobriel on the dramatic escalation in the Middle East.
From a sea of searing anger on the streets of Yemen's capital city, to this fiery display of defiance in Tehran. Massive protests spilled through pockets of the Arab world today, sparked by a coordinated military assault on key targets this morning by a U.S.-led coalition with support from members of the Canadian Armed Forces.
The United States and the United Kingdom have engaged in precision strikes to degrade the Houthis' capacity to continue to violate international law. We have been there in a supportive role.
U.S. officials say Allied forces bombed dozens of sites across Yemen, which are used by Iranian-backed Houthi fighters. The military targets included logistical hubs, air defense systems, as well as weapons storage locations.
These were laser-guided bombs that literally could fly through the window of your house. That's how precise they are.
I don't think there's any civilian casualties. That's another reason why it's a success.
The show of force comes 1 week after the White House and a host of allied nations issued a final warning to the Houthis to cease attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea.
Our aim is very clear. It's to de-escalate tensions and to restore stability.
Though further escalation in the region has been a primary concern since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war, with Iran supplying both the Houthis and Hezbollah with weapons.
Iran is able to do this almost as if it's a contracting organization, like the Wagner Group did with Russia and Ukraine. And that's what makes it difficult on a political stage.
With Russia condemning the U.S.-led response today, Houthi militants are already promising a fierce retaliation. Leader Abdel Malak al-Houthi saying in part, the response will be even greater than the recent operations targeting Americans at sea.
The Iranian-backed rebel organization have fired dozens of missiles and drones into the Red Sea region since November. One of the questions now, Heather, is following the latest U.S.-led airstrikes. Do the Houthis still have the capability to respond?
Adrian Gobriel in Toronto. As conflict in the Middle East grows, Israel is pushing back against attempts at the World Court to limit its military action against Hamas in Gaza. Today, calling South Africa's accusations of genocide unfounded and distorted. CTV's Judy Trin now on the international courtroom drama.
Please be seated. These judges will determine if acts of genocide against Palestinians is occurring in Gaza, an accusation leveled by South Africa, refuted by Israel.
The application and request should be dismissed for what they are, a libel.
Israel says it's waging war because Hamas attacked the Jewish state on October 7th. Its lawyers railed against South Africa's use of the Genocide Convention to persuade the court to order a ceasefire.
It will turn an instrument adopted by the international community to prevent horrors of the kind that shocked the conscience of humanity during the Holocaust into a weapon in the hands of terrorist groups.
Most of Gaza has been destroyed. More than 2 million Palestinians at risk of starvation and disease. According to the Hamas-run health authority, more than 23,000 people have died.
How many thousands of casualties are in fact militants? How many were killed by Hamas fire?
Nothing justifies genocidal acts currently being committed by Israel. Self-defense is no answer to genocide.
2 weeks after South Africa filed its claim, Canada's Prime Minister finally weighed in with support for the World Court, but not the allegations.
But our wholehearted support of the IGA and its processes does not mean that we support the premise of the case brought forward by South Africa.
Proving genocide is a high bar, and analysts will be watching how the risks are weighed.
They would be concerned about endorsing a kind of unilateral ceasefire when it cannot order Hamas to also commit to a ceasefire.
The World Court will decide within weeks if an order to stop Israel's military action is legally justified. But it's an order that can't be enforced without approval from the UN Security Council. Heather.
All right, Judy, thanks. The white supremacist who killed 10 black people at a Buffalo grocery store could end up on death row. The gunman, Peyton Gendron, is already serving a life sentence for murder and domestic terrorism in the mass shooting 2 years ago. Today, federal prosecutors said they're seeking the death penalty in a separate hate crimes case. Emotional accounts today at a coroner's inquest into the death of a teenager shot by a Toronto police officer more than a decade ago. 18-year-old Sammy Yatim was alone on a streetcar holding a knife when he was shot by then-Constable James Forcillo in 2 separate volleys of bullets. Yatim's mother told the inquest his death paralyzed her and locked her in grief. She asked the jury to make recommendations to improve police training so no other mother had to suffer as she had. The police chief of St. John, New Brunswick, has launched a review of his force's conduct in 2 wrongful murder convictions 40 years ago. Walter Gillespie and Robert Mailman were exonerated last week of a 1983 murder. Gillespie served 21 years of his life sentence, while Mailman served 18. A retired senior RCMP officer has also been asked to conduct an independent review of the investigation. The U.S. aviation regulator has extended the grounding of Boeing 737 MAX 9 airplanes indefinitely as new images emerge of that terrifying mid-air emergency.
We need everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened.
This was moments after the door plug of an Alaska Airlines flight blew off at 16,000 feet above Portland, Oregon. There were 171 passengers and 6 crew on board. America's aviation watchdog said today it will tighten oversight of Boeing itself with an immediate audit of the 737 MAX 9. Coming up, when winter becomes a political foe.
I have got to tell you, it is cold outside.
Temperatures are dropping.
The Republican campaign trail buried in snow. Plus, the Ukrainian watchmaker giving time back to a Canadian town. Taiwan is electing a new president. It's already Saturday morning there, and the polls are now open. There's lots at stake, notably relations with China, which claims the island nation as its own and has threatened to invade. 3 candidates are vying for power, each with different approaches to Beijing. Whoever prevails, they'll have a powerful ally. U.S. President Joe Biden plans to send someone to meet the winner. Republican voters will cast their ballots for their preferred candidate in just a few days in Iowa. It's the first nominating contest in the U.S. presidential election, and it's been hit hard with snow. A blizzard bringing whiteout conditions and dangerous cold could threaten voter turnout. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Melvin reports.
It's a mess out there. In Iowa, a massive snowstorm has buried some last-minute campaign events by Republican candidates, hoping that a win here will be a springboard to the White House.
It's going to be -15, but I'm going to be out there.
Nikki Haley shifted her in-person closing arguments to a telephone town hall, trying to drum up enthusiasm.
Please wear layers of clothes just in case they're aligned so that you are staying safe. And please go in there and know that you are setting the tone for the country.
We're having fun.
Ron DeSantis canceled some, but not all live events. He and his supporters braving the blizzard.
I'm really impressed that so many people came out given the weather.
And urging supporters to get out there Monday at more than 1,600 caucus sites where Republicans will gather in gyms, community centers, and Legion halls to cast their ballot. But the record-breaking cold could put a chill on voter turnout.
I don't think you'll ever be able to cast a vote that has more impact given the circumstances.
Both candidates need a second-place finish here if they're to take on Donald Trump. If the polls are correct, the former president has a commanding lead and an easy win here.
He's not shaking hands and meeting people and taking pictures and doing the things all the other candidates do.
Some voters are frustrated. Trump's been off the campaign trail and in a New York City court over business fraud. He faces several criminal cases. For some, though, it doesn't matter.
It's only 91 charges. Come on, bring it on. No, the more they attack him, the more people love him.
He cares about the people. He cares about us.
There's a lot at stake in Iowa, a test of the former president's strength among Republicans and whether the other candidates can stop him. The wild card now, the weather. Joy Melvin, CTV News, Washington.
Still ahead, navigating the flu season. Doctors warn of severe symptoms amid a high number of cases. As families return to a post-holiday routine, there are growing flu concerns for adults and children. The number of cases may be leveling off, but remains high in the new year. CTV's Vanessa Lee reports.
This Saskatoon baby spent his first Christmas in hospital after he got the flu.
At any point in the moment, I could have lost my baby. I'm really happy that nothing bad came from it, but it was really hard.
For days, Michael Desjardins' son Maverick struggled with a high fever, cough, and was vomiting.
Take it seriously. Don't treat it like it's nothing, is all I gotta say, because it's something really serious.
Hospitals are seeing a spike in respiratory viruses, including the flu, which can have devastating effects. In the first week of January across Canada, 229 people ended up in hospital. 27 were admitted to the ICU and 7 people died. Despite a decrease from the previous week, doctors say don't let your guard down just yet.
I wouldn't get complacent when we hear that there's a little bit less flu now than there was a week ago. There's still a lot of influenza out there.
The flu is also hitting children hard, with 42 young people ending up in hospital in the first week of 2024. Flu, COVID, and RSV are putting pressure on an already stretched healthcare system. Officials are urging people to get vaccinated, saying it could help ease the strain.
It's to protect also the more vulnerable people around you. So if you are seeing your grandparents or if you are seeing people that have chronic diseases or pregnant women, then it will protect them.
Experts say we're hovering around peak flu levels now and warn the number of cases is expected to stay high for weeks. Vanessa Lee, CTV News, Montreal.
Quaker Canada is recalling more than 36 products due to the potential exposure to salmonella. The voluntary recall includes Harvest Crunch cereals and popular granola bars like Chewy Chocolate Chip. Quaker says the move follows a similar recall in the U.S. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says there's been no reported illnesses. After the break, paying it forward. A Ukrainian refugee gives a second chance at life to a timeless piece of history. We leave you tonight in a small town overlooking Newfoundland's picturesque Conception Bay. It's one of the oldest European settlements in the province, but a big piece of its history had come to a standstill until a Ukrainian refugee gave it the test of time. CTV's Garrett Barry explains.
This clock tower has stood at the old Carbonear post office for more than 100 years. And for many of those years, it stood still.
It's probably 60, maybe 70 years since it went.
Some attempts had been made to fix it in this historic town, but none of them quite ticked.
I got it going for about 10 minutes, so it used to stop.
Until late last year, when help came from an unexpected place. A mix of fate, strife from war, and family connection brought Ludmila Pass from central Ukraine to Newfoundland and Labrador last year. And when her daughter saw a broken down clock and a Facebook post asking for help, it was a chance for her mom to put decades of training as a watchmaker in Ukraine to use.
I thought, that's a good idea. My mom will be busy. My father always complained that he will be bored here, he will have nothing to do, and they will be bored, and they will stay for 2 weeks and go back home.
It only took a few hours, and this clock was ticking again. The town's deputy mayor says it's a true gift.
And then to actually see it working, it was absolutely wonderful.
In her first few weeks in Newfoundland, Ludmila has only gotten busier. She doesn't speak English, so her daughter, Yulia, made a Facebook page advertising her mom's services as a watchmaker. And now her house is full of projects.
For her, it's always new story of someone's life, of the story of the clock, all the time different.
Each clock an important memory, a story that Ludmila gets to learn. Garrett Barry, CTV News, Chapels Cove.
The gift of time. That's our newscast for this Friday night. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.